Howdy once again everyone, another month, another announcement of a radical new Sigma lens. What a year they're having so far, my gosh, their designers must be working harder than air traffic controllers. Well, here is the new Sigma 28 to 105mm f2.8 DGDN Art. Yes, 28 to 105mm f2.8. Awesome! The ears of all kinds of wedding photographers, photojournalists, event and portrait photographers just pricked right up. And it's full frame. With its minimum focus distance of only 40cm, it has decent macro ability as well, and that zoom range is potentially very useful for video makers too, looking for a bright aperture lens whose focal length they can get just right. I can imagine this lens being of great interest to professional cinematographers. The lens will cost £1,399 in the UK when it comes out. I'll pin the US dollar price in the comments, be sure to remind me if I forget. It'll be available on Sony E and also on L-mount cameras, and as I mentioned, it covers a full frame image circle. I'd like to thank Sigma UK for loaning me this lens for 10 days or so for evaluation, although as usual this is a totally independent review. On a full frame camera, that 28 to 105mm zoom range for an f2.8 lens is simply out of this world, although not completely unprecedented. Tamron made one of these things back in 1997. I actually tested one a few years ago, link in the description below. It was a bumper-to-bumper disaster, one of the worst lenses I've ever tested. Then, recently, Canon brought out their own 24 to 105mm f2.8 zoom lens, an awesome piece of equipment. Again, link in the description below for a review, but at a price of $3,000 and a weight of £3, it's rather a pain to shoot with and carry around with you, not a particularly fun or affordable lens for mortal human beings like me. So I think there's definitely room on the market for a Sigma lens like this, but is it worth its price? Let's start by looking at its build quality. The first thing that jumps out is how big the lens is, although not to the point of being unmanageable. It weighs about 990 grams or over 2 pounds, so it's rather heavy too, although not quite to the point of being tiresome to use. Its body is made of a mixture of metal and plastic, feeling fairly solid, and is based on a metal mount with weather sealing. Next comes an aperture ring. This can be set to turn smoothly or with clicks at every third of an f-stop, which caters well for both stills and video shooters. Usefully, that aperture ring can also be locked in or out of automatic mode, making it harder to accidentally set incorrectly. Next comes a rubberized zoom ring. It turns quite smoothly and evenly, but a little heavily with a little stickiness to it, so it does take a bit of effort on the old fingers to quickly zoom in and out. Then again, that's what you'd expect on a lens with such a zoom range, combined with larger than usual glass elements inside. The zoom ring can be locked at 28mm, although it's not a very firm lock. Following that, we get an auto manual focus switch alongside a couple of customizable focus hold buttons, followed by the rubberized manual focus ring, which also turns very smoothly and responsively. When you're zoomed in, the lens displays almost no focus breathing, very impressive. Zoom out and it gets a little more noticeable, but honestly, for video makers, this is a great performance. The lens's autofocus motor works silently and accurately. In single-shot autofocus mode, the focus motor worked very quickly. In continuous autofocus mode though, it performs big focus pulls almost instantaneously. This is the fastest autofocus you can really get nowadays. Very impressive. The lens comes with one of Sigma's good quality padded carry cases, as well as this nice lockable lens hood with a rubber trim. Its filter thread size is a large 82mm and it does not have image stabilization, although it cooperated with the in-body stabilization of my Sony camera pretty well. All in all, the lens's large size and heavy weight may put some people off, but other than that, the build quality is still excellent and it has a number of particularly useful features for video work, including almost no focus breathing and incredibly fast autofocus. Okay then, image quality. I'm testing this lens today on a Sony a7R III camera with its 42 megapixel full frame sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on for this test. The reason I like testing on a 42 megapixel sensor, by the way, is that it's a lovely happy medium between a 24 or 33 megapixel Sony camera and a higher resolution 60 megapixel one. Anyway, at 28mm and f2.8, image quality is stunning in the middle, razor sharp with excellent contrast. That sharpness remains throughout the image frame until we reach the very corners, where a little softness and darkness can be seen. Nothing too serious though. Stop down to f4 for more brightness and sharpness to emerge, and the very edges look just a little sharper at f5.6 and f8, with the lens staying about as sharp as this until you stop down to f11. Let's zoom into 55mm then. At f2.8 we're getting the same perfect image quality in the middle. The corners again are noticeably softer, but not too terrible. They get a lot sharper at f4, but that's about as sharp as they get really. Finally, let's zoom all the way into 105mm. At f2.8, the lens loses its razor edge of sharpness and contrast here, but image quality is still very good. Over in the corners, again, we get some softness. Stop down to f4 for an improvement in the corners, but again, that is as sharp as they get. The middle now looks fantastic. The lens stays this sharp down to f16, where diffraction is now taking a heavy toll. Overall, on a full-frame camera, I don't know if this lens will be quite sharp enough for the most demanding of pixel-peeping professionals, but honestly, I personally wouldn't have much hesitation shooting a wedding with it. It's nice and sharp in the middle of your images, and the corner image quality isn't so bright and shiny, but it's acceptable, especially considering the lens's ambitious design. Well, let's take a quick look at how this lens performs on a cropped sensor by mounting it onto a 24 megapixel APS-C camera. At 28mm and f2.8, we still get razor sharpness in the middle of the image. The corners though are looking much sharper than on a full frame. That is the sweet spot advantage of an APS-C camera at work right there. Although we do also notice a little colour fringing on contrasting edges. Stop down to f4 for just a touch more sharpness and contrast, but that's as sharp as the image quality gets. Let's zoom into 55mm now. Again, excellent image quality in the middle of the frame. Over in the corners this time, softness is a bit more noticeable. Stop down to f4 though, and those corners get much sharper. The lens stays this sharp down to about f11. Finally, 105mm. At f2.8, image quality is slightly soft in the middle now with slightly low contrast. Corner image quality is looking a little rough here too. Stop down to f4 for more contrast and a touch more sharpness in the corners. The middle looks fantastic now though. Stop down to f5.6 and the middle looks as good as before, but the image corners are looking better, and at f8 they're also looking okay. Overall, on an APS-C camera, the lens is nice and sharp in the middle across most of its zoom range, but things fall apart slightly at 105mm, where you'll want to stop down a little for best results. Alright, let's hop back onto a full frame camera now, turn off in-camera corrections and take a look at distortion and vignetting. At 28mm we see a lot of barrel distortion and rather dark corners. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 for those corners to brighten up. Zoom into 40mm or so and that distortion straightens out. Zoom all the way into 105mm and it flips into rather strong pincushion distortion with, again, heavy vignetting. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 for those corners to brighten up. So, well, it's a typically bad performance for a modern zoom lens here. That's just the direction lens designers are going in today, getting the camera to correct those things. Make sure your images are getting corrected, either by your camera or in post. Next, close-up image quality, and as I mentioned, the lens has a very impressive minimum focus distance of only 40cm. Nice! At f2.8, close-up image quality is rather soft and ghostly. Stop down to f4 for big improvements though, and at f5.6, close-up sharpness and contrast is excellent. Let's see how the lens performs against bright lights now. At wider angles, it's excellent news. Contrast remains very high, and there's almost no flaring to be seen here. Zoom in though, and we catch some glaring and border flaring when bright lights are directly in the image or just on the periphery. And while we're working in the dark, let's take a look for coma and sun stars. Here's some good news. Even at f2.8, coma smearing on bright points of light is basically non-existent. Nice! So let's zoom out again and look for sunstars. Stop down to f5.6 and they become quite noticeable already. They get progressively more impressive from f8 to f11, f16 and f22, so that's pretty awesome to see as well. Next, bokeh. This lens can get you some deeply out of focus backgrounds which are averagely smooth, quite nice on a whole actually for a zoom lens. However, if you zoom right in, then exceptionally bright specular highlights can have a problematic edge to them, but only in rather extreme situations and a slightly busy substructure. It's nothing disastrous though, only on very bright specular highlights when you're zoomed in, and generally apart from that the bokeh is fairly smooth. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. It's rather noticeable at f2.8 and f4, although I've certainly seen worse than this before. At f5.6 it's reduced and at f8 it's gone. Overall, this might not be a perfect camera lens, but it certainly is good and extremely useful, not to mention enjoyable to use, and I can imagine wedding photographers and photojournalists finding it very helpful. In terms of its image quality, we get mostly good but slightly mixed results here. The lens doesn't have the sharpest corner image quality, basically, but then again, hardly a surprise for such an ambitious design. Something I didn't mention before is that this lens seemed to have quite warm colours on the whole. Whether that bothers you or not is up to you, but it's more than sharp enough for 4K video work, and its very good build quality and autofocus, low coma, big sunstars and good close shooting ability all make it a pretty great lens to use, so it certainly does come recommended if it covers what you need. Thanks for watching everyone, I hope you enjoyed that video, and if not, you're probably on the wrong channel. Try watching some videos about cats instead, that's what I'm going to go into do now anyway. If you regularly enjoy these reviews and find them helpful, then check out my Patreon page in the description below. There you can find all kinds of exclusive bonus videos, as well as early access to lots of my reviews, as well as getting a warm, fuzzy feeling deep inside for supporting the channel. Take care and God bless everyone.